Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Yinzelvania, where nostalgia meets style in the heart of Western Pennsylvania. A completely family-owned and operated apparel retailer specializing in designs that celebrate the unique people, places, and traditions of Pittsburgh and its surrounding areas. Hey, you want to remember a roller rink of the past, or a radio or TV station, a bar or a restaurant, and certainly a lot of retro sports? Well, from the heart of Steeler Nation in beautiful Dubois, Pennsylvania, it's Yinzelvania.com. Promo code to save 20% off. Good seats still available. That's Yinzelvania, YINZYLVANIA.com. Promo code good seats still available for 20% off. Go Steelers. And now here's our show.
Get ready for the oldest game in America with a new twist. High scoring, high energy, heavy hits will raise the game of lacrosse to an all-time high. No-look passes, goals from every angle will challenge the senses. Thundering body checks coming from the superstars of the game. The best lacrosse players on the planet take it outside. Get ready for the fireworks. Major League Lacrosse is next. Live from College Stadium in Lowell, Massachusetts, just about 30 miles north of Boston. It's Major League Lacrosse, the inaugural weekend. The Boston Cannons to host the New Jersey Pride as Major League Lacrosse is on the air. The world's best coming to you. Great crowd on hand at College Stadium, refurbished and looking as good as it ever has. And young people on hand by the thousands tonight to watch the Boston Cannons play their first ever game in a league founded in the winter of '99 by Jake Steinfeld, body by Jake. Then the summer showcase in 2000 and the season commencing this week. I'm Mike Crispino along with Quint Kesnick, and we've got a great schedule to look ahead to.
There are 6 teams. They'll play 7 home and away games. We have a lacrosse star game August 2nd in Connecticut, and then we've got the championship weekend on Labor Day.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, settle down, everybody. How are you? It's your pal, Tim Hanlon. It's Good Seats Still Available. It's the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us. If this is your first time here, welcome to the proceedings. And what took you so long? If you're a return listener, well, welcome back. You know where all the most comfortable furniture is around here. Grab a piece and sit down and relax, and let's enjoy and luxuriate in a sport that we've nibbled around the edges of on a number of different occasions in years past. But we are excited to get back to again this week with our guest, S.L. Price, the longtime, well-regarded superior journalist from Sports Illustrated and numerous other places. We're going to be talking about his new book called The American Game. And yes, it is the American game. And in many respects, you can, if you do the research, you recognize that lacrosse is probably the true original American game, predating even the colonization of this country back in the 1700s, because this is very much an originated game from that of the Native Americans that preceded our place here on this little patch of earth, and has mightily maintained its presence, and arguably is at the cusp, as it has been for seemingly 20, 30 years, of breaking through to becoming, if you will, the next big professional sport. Or certainly it is a very well followed sport. It enjoys immense popularity still in the Northeast and the Middle Atlantic regions, but various pockets around the country are really kind of really sort of creating roots more so to make it truly more of a national pastime, both on the pro and certainly on the amateur level. And there's a whole bunch to talk about lacrosse and the story that SL's put together. And we'll get into that, but I want to table set that with the clip that you just heard there at our intro, because the professional game has had a very choppy history in this country, and What you heard there from June 9th, 2001 from, I think it was an ESPN2 broadcast, back when ESPN2 was just getting off the ground. The Deuce, that was the inaugural, that wasn't ESPN2. This was, I think, a regional game on Fox Sports something, whatever it was. But ESPN2 carried national games as well. Regardless, this clip was from June 9th, 2001. And this was the first regular ever season of something called Major League Lacrosse. As you heard there, it was founded by Jake Steinfeld of Body by Jake fame. Lasted for a good 20 some odd years. And that was from June 9th, 2001. That was the first ever game between two of the first ever franchises in that, I think, 6-team league at that point. The Boston Cannons and the New Jersey Pride. MLL, as you probably know, merged a handful of years ago before the pandemic into what is now known as the Premier League or Premier League Lacrosse. And MLL was sort of a team-based proposition based in various cities, mostly in the Northeast. And PLL, once it got started, was mostly a touring kind of thing with sort of manufactured team names. That merger that happened has now tweaked the PLL kind of dynamic now, where they are now themselves, the PLL, going into a team-based kind of format starting this year. But it's recognition of the front, back, sideways kind of approach to professional lacrosse in this country, which has had its various fits and starts. We've nibbled at the topic in years past, especially around the indoor version or box lacrosse, which, as you'll hear in our conversation coming up with SL Price, is arguably the more pure version that the Iroquois tribe and the Haudenosaune players of that game would probably most recognize today. The indoor game represented by the original National Lacrosse League, a topic that we talked about with our pal Dave Coleman and the late great Steve Holroyd, who we dedicate this week's episode to, who we just lost a couple of weeks back, sadly. We've talked to Russ Klein in the past as well, one of the founders and the chief inspiration behind the Eagle Pro Box Lacrosse League that started in '87, became the major indoor lacrosse league, and now still soldiers on as the second incarnation, if you will, of the National Lacrosse League. Been around for, almost 30 years now, and pretty exciting stuff. And around the country, too, teams in like Denver and San Diego and Vancouver and all kinds of places, right? Fort Worth, Texas. So the sport of lacrosse, right, is not only a still emerging professional endeavor, but is hugely popular regionally, but increasingly nationally on the amateur level as well. World Championships. It is going to be back in the Olympics in 2028. A key component of our conversation coming up. It has obviously is one of the marquee now sports in NCAA Division I. There's the Memorial Day Final Four, if you will. They'll be played this year at Foxborough up in Massachusetts. Next weekend, Memorial Day being the crowning tournament of men's and now women's lacrosse in the NCAA. But as you'll hear in our conversation coming up with SL Price, we talk about sort of the foundations of the game, from where it emanated, the Native American culture behind it, and all kinds of things that traverse and parallel the furtive and not always cleanly delineated American experience too, both sports and generally culturally. The Iroquois Nationals have been a team that you may have heard of in international competition. You may have heard of the Haudenosaune tribe name as well, and you will get into how certainly in international lacrosse competitions, they are comprised of Native Americans from original of these tribes that want to play as representatives of that and them, not as quote unquote Americans or quote unquote Canadians or any other nationality for that matter. So we're really getting into some interesting dynamics about cultural labels and cultural definitions of teams. By the way, which might actually be also part of the Olympics. The Iroquois Nationals may indeed be the label by which the Haudenosaune tribe may indeed play and not be represented as an American team or as a Canadian team, but from that Indian nation name that they are known for and known by in other walks of life. So really cool and interesting stuff. And you're going to learn a lot about sort of this sport, the culture of it. Jim Brown, the great Syracuse and professional football player, probably one of the best amateur lacrosse players that ever was in this country. A lot of people don't even recognize that. There's just a lot of stuff, the appropriation of it, the overlap with hockey in Canada and in the indoor game. And it's just all kinds of stuff that we sort of get into. And this book that SL Price has put together is coming out on Tuesday as we record this. And I highly recommend it. You can even, before I tell you where to get it, you can enjoy an excerpt from it from yesterday's, as we're recording this, New York Times Sunday edition, Sunday magazine. The article is titled, let's see here if I search here for my title here, was called "They Invented the Game. Will they be allowed to play it in the Olympics?" And it is taken from the massively appealing and thoroughly researched book that comes out this Tuesday, wherever good books are found. It is called The American Game, History and Hope in the Country of Lacrosse. A surprising title, a surprising topic. It is written by our guest this week, S.L. Price. You can find it wherever good books are found. It is published by Atlantic Monthly. And of course, if you go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, all you got to do is search up this episode numbered 395, and you'll find a couple of convenient links to our friends at Amazon. And you'll get the hardcover, the Kindle, or even the audiobook versions of this book, The American Game, as quickly as humanly possible from our friends at Amazon. And we'll get a couple of shekels of referral love when you do so and you purchase it that way. All right. So let's not waste any more time. I really, really enjoyed this conversation with the great Mr. Price. And we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff: the World Championships, the NCAA, the 2028 Olympics, and Olympics generally. And we nibble around the edges around the professional game in this country, why it hasn't really taken off, and the culture of it all. And we begin our conversation with some mutual reminiscences of the wonderful time that we both had, albeit not at the same time, at the wondrous periodical known as Sports Illustrated, where SL and yours truly effectively kind of got their start and made their bones. And that's how we start the conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Here we go. You made your bones at Sports Illustrated, and I don't know if we crossed paths. I mean, if we did, I don't know when were you there?
Okay, so you were there in 1987, you said?
Only for a summer, but yes, it was quite a magical summer.
No, and you were, by the way, there in the absolute prime of the SI golden age. I mean, the drink cart was going through the offices on Friday afternoons. The budgets were through the roof, and they were minting money.
Well, and you know why? You know why they were minting money is because People magazine was taking off like a rocket.
Exactly. So, and I got there in 94.
Okay. Sorry, I missed you.
Right. I got there and I worked there from 94 till basically the end of 2019 into 2020. Let me back up. Let me back up for a second.
Was Sports Illustrated your first job coming out of college? How did you get into the writing thing to begin with, and Sports Illustrated at that?
No, not. And in fact, I went to the University of North Carolina, and I covered your man, Michael Jordan, as a sophomore at Chapel Hill, which was his breakout season, really, when he became Michael Jordan. And I was a sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel. And so I was lucky enough to be at North Carolina during this incredible golden age, not only of obviously Tar Heel basketball, they win their first national championship, but the football team was top 5. The baseball team was superb. And the lacrosse team had just won 2 national championships, basically when I arrived. And so they were an incredible sports program. And I wrote for the newspaper. I majored in English. I was a terrible reporter, did not have any kind of journalistic chops whatsoever. And then I went, and on the strength, I think, of my basketball clips, having covered a national figure like Jordan, I graduated in '83, and on the strength of that, I got a job at the Sacramento Bee. And within a year, I was the Kings beat writer when they first moved from Kansas City to Sacramento.
Wow,
So
that's great. I mean, in Sacramento, that was a big deal because that essentially was crowning Sacramento as a big league city because they finally got one of the big four franchises, the
Oh
league.
no, it was unbelievable. And the fact that I fell into that was astonishing. I think I was 23, 24 years old. And luckily I mean, at the time I was simply scared to death because, I didn't really understand what beat reporting was, but it was one of the few places in America that had 2 morning newspapers in direct competition. I mean, New York, Chicago aside, but one of the few that still had a, an ongoing sort of newspaper war. And so the competition was stiff, and I realized, well, I better learn how to be a reporter or I'm not going to be here very long. So I worked for the Sacramento Bee for 6 years. The last 3 I was in San Francisco, and fell into another golden age because I was covering all those San Francisco sports, the Giants, the A's in the late '80s. I was in the earthquake game on the upper deck at Candlestick, covered the 49ers. And then from '90 to '94, I moved to Miami, which, you could argue was another golden age because they got baseball, they got the Marlins. I covered that expansion hunt. And in '94, Sports Illustrated came calling, and I stayed in Miami for 6 years, and then moved after 6 years. My family and, our family moved to DC, and I worked for Sports Illustrated for 26 years.
So
Yeah.
for those of a certain age, describe what Sports Illustrated was like in that time and maybe what you heard about it prior to that, because I think most people of youngins today,
Yeah.
they see SI, it's a brand out there, it's a hollow version of
Yeah.
what it used to be. But getting tapped to come to Sports Illustrated was a BFD at that point.
No, it was a massive deal. But I will say, I mean, at the time in 1994, I loved working for newspapers. And actually, I was writing columns. I was writing for the news side. I had a column in the Sunday magazine, for the Miami Herald, and it took me like 6 weeks to take the job. I know that sounds absurd because it was, and you're right, it was the gold standard at the time, and it was the ESPN of the time. I mean, and one of the little known facts about Sports Illustrated is that one of the great mistakes is they could have bought ESPN, and they kind of passed on it. Like, oh well, this thing about tractor pulls and softball isn't going to be that big a deal. We'll go on with our magazine. So, one of the great business blunders was Sports Illustrated passing on ESPN and having the opportunity to do that. That was before my time. But the point is that it was absolutely the gold standard. But I wasn't sure whether. I just didn't know whether it'd be a good fit for me. And and this is even more obscure, but you may remember. In fact, I'm sure you remember. I was more of a inside sports guy. There was a magazine called Inside Sports, which it was a monthly, and Gary Smith and a lot of just huge titans of sports writing were writing.
Pete Axthelm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was an incredible lineup, and for me, it was more daring and more in depth. And I didn't really appreciate SI as much as a lot of other people. So I did look at it with a bit of a gimlet eye, which was kind of stupid looking back. Like, once, and by the way, at the Miami Herald, people were like, why are you not leaving? Like, why are you why aren't you taking the show? So it took me a while, but it absolutely was the gold standard. I mean, and when I got there, I was covering tennis with Sally Jenkins and college football with Tim Layden, and you were surrounded by incredible talent. Everybody was better than me, and I was just trying to like survive and keep my head above water, and things bent right. I ended up doing a lot of back of the book bonuses for the magazine. And I covered 10 Olympics. I covered a year. I covered tennis for nearly the entire time I was there, and was going to Grand Slams in Paris and London and New York every year, and it was absurdly great. I mean, and the budget, at the time was through the roof. They were making a lot of money, and they liked to spend it. And so it was completely unlike working for newspapers for 10 years. It was an astonishing place to be, and the talent level you were surrounded by. Not just, by the way, not just writers, but the photography was astounding. The photographers were great to work with, and the editors overall were made you better and helped. And the fact checkers, I mean, the reporting staff was incredibly deep. I mean, I'm not kidding. Any writer who says they don't need a fact checker or doesn't need an editor is a fool, if you ask me, because in the end, we all are human, and we all need to be protected from ourselves in some way or shape or form.
Well, it was also, frankly, a time when, we're both of a certain age to remember this, when magazines were sort of at their, I don't know what their apex, but they were certainly at great influence, right? I mean, there's a wonderful book that's sitting on my dresser at home that I desperately want to read, is Graydon Carter's When the Going Was Good. It's basically sort of a memoir about his life in magazines, but I mean, it was a golden age.
Yeah, and I wrote for Graydon Carter. I did a piece on Diner, the movie Diner, for Vanity Fair. We're going to Hollywood. Vanity Fair is essentially the ESPN of Hollywood. Like, going to Hollywood under Vanity Fair's umbrella, all doors are thrown open. The access was insane. People couldn't be more delighted to speak to you. I stayed in the Chateau Marmont. Like, it's just ridiculous. So you're exactly right. It was the golden age of magazines and the golden age of newspapers from basically Watergate until 2008. You basically had, newspapers with a monopoly on classified ads, which was the key, because money was what gave newspapers their swagger. They could tell, the main industry in town, if they weren't going to advertise, well, that's fine. We'll be fine without you. We're still going to write about, the crimes in your boardroom, or, to the, the city, the mayor or the city council was like, well, we're going to come down on your lease or something. They're like, fine. We're the Miami Herald. And newspapers had a lot of swagger, but money was the secret reason for that, which was that really, I mean, they had a monopoly on classified ads. And then Craigslist came along, and then the internet and media, both newspapers first and then magazines, and now mainstream TV and even cable is understanding that, the money will dry up and people are going elsewhere if you're not nimble and if you can't pivot and understand what's coming next. And newspapers and magazines especially still are trying to figure out what's coming next. Financially, they still haven't figured out a business model to replicate those great days.
All right. So how does, and I'm not even going to, all right, I will indulge. One last thing.
Yeah.
Did you ever, and there's I guess a connection here, because Frank DeFord
Yes.
was a guy, for years at Sports Illustrated, made his chops there and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you ever get romance for that brief period of time when he was starting and running the National, that daily sports newspaper idea?
I did. I was at the Miami Herald, and he wanted to hire me as the Miami columnist. And it was mystifying, because if you think Sports Illustrated was spending money, the National had this Mexican businessman, I think his name was Oscaraga, I believe was his name, and he just threw an amazing amount of money into the National, and they were spending money like it was unreal. It had an incredible office, and I remember going into that office, and Frank DeFord was sort of, kind of reclining on a divan in his office and saying,
as one did when he was.
One did, yeah. Almost as if someone was going to come in and peel him a grape. But and he did offer me a job, but I turned it down. I loved what I was doing for the Miami Herald, and I loved being connected to a city. That was the other thing with going to Sports Illustrated, is that I really did love the idea of a newspaper as sort of a place that expresses the heartbeat and the mindset of a specific place and time. And so the National thing it took a while for me to get there. So even with the National and with Sports Illustrated, um, I did end up turning down Frank DeFord. So I guess I can say that. Yeah.
And the Thinking Man's USA Today sports section, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, and by the way, it was incredible. Like
I agree. I love the idea, right? I mean,
Oh.
Il Gazzetto, the sport. I mean, in Italy, I mean, it felt like a right thing to do.
Oh, and they did an incredible job. The problem was distribution, deadlines, getting it out in time. I mean, they had, I mean, it was a great idea. And in some ways, the internet has now replaced that, but I mean, people get their daily sports newspaper every day online. But I mean, they had great writers and they did a beautiful job. And really, they just, again, the editorial side, and obviously I'm a writer, so I'm going to be biased, but overall, in general, the editorial side of newspapers and magazines has been consistently let down by the business side over and over and over again over the last 2-3 decades because frankly you got the best of editorial people, the best writers, the best minds, working in journalism. You didn't necessarily get the best business minds going to journalism. A lot of them would be going to Wall Street, obviously, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and maybe you're getting the fourth or fifth tier. So not a lot of visionaries in media. And when the tide went out and the tide of money went out, everybody sort of stood revealed. So that's really what happened.
All right. So how do you segue into out of Sports Illustrated? And I guess important for this conversation is it seems to me, projecting onto you, that the lacrosse experience from your college days somehow reared its ugly head, so to speak, again in your mind, either through timing or something persistent, or as a story that needed to be told and to go deep in it.
Well, I mean, I've written 4 other books, and at Sports Illustrated, I mean, I did anything I was told, but also you got to sort of do one for you, one for me, if you were lucky, and I was lucky. And I loved sort of the stories where culture and sports come together. I mean, I feel like sports really does express a lot of what people care about more than many other areas in the world, in our life. And you go to a stadium, and you see a ball game, the athletes are as honest as they can be. I don't mean talking to you. I mean, they reveal who they are by what they do. And you look in the stands and people with their passion and their feeling tell you not only about how they feel about that specific player or team, but how they feel about the city and the place that they live and the friends that they're with. And there's a certain honesty that sports brings out of people because people are passionate about it, and they can't. When people are passionate about something, they really can't lie. They can't really cover it up. You look in the stands, you see who people are in the moments when they're upset or overjoyed or whatever about something about their team and their city have done. So I love that, or country, and that's why, for example, I covered a bunch of World Cups, and for the Miami Herald, I covered the 1990 World Cup in Italy. And really, that came home to me there. And when I went to Cuba a bunch of times, I wrote a book about sports in Cuba, how sports was an expression of far more than just competition and bats and balls and touchdowns. It was really about people and their lives and how they reveal themselves through sports. So my previous book was about a steel town outside of Pittsburgh called Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, which produced your man Mike Ditka, Tony Dorsett, Darrell Revis, Henry Mancini, Madonna's father, and essentially the labor movement in America. So, and it was the largest steel mill in America. So I was able to and they have, even though their team is incredibly small, their school is incredibly small. They have like 30 boys in the senior class, consistently as a single A size school, winning 4A state championships in football. So the football team has remained the one thing in that town that has remained vibrant while everything else has fallen apart as the steel mills went down and drugs rushed in. So I spent 6 years doing that book. And in my time at Sports Illustrated, I was not, I didn't grow up playing lacrosse. I certainly had no real exposure to it, very minimal growing up. And then when I went to North Carolina, obviously they won their first championships. Willie Scroggs is this incredibly Dickensian named coach who went from Johns Hopkins and basically, in some ways, I feel, kickstarted this whole growth of the game by taking it to a place it had no business taking root and establishing a dynasty down in North Carolina. But I didn't cover lacrosse when I was at North Carolina. I had no money. The only exposure I had was I was a custodian in the jock dorm airing house at North Carolina, and there were a lot of lacrosse players there. So as well as other athletes, but really didn't have much exposure to it. But in 2006, I went and covered the Duke lacrosse rape case, which, for people who don't know, was this situation where Duke lacrosse players had a party and hired some strippers to come to the party, African American strippers, and it wasn't a pleasant scene, to say the least. But the woman involved falsely accused three lacrosse players of rape, and there was this rush to judgment. The lacrosse players were all not just declared not guilty by Roy Cooper, the future governor of North Carolina. He was then, I think, the attorney general, but innocent, which doesn't happen very often. But it was such a travesty of justice. The prosecutor was out of control and sanctioned eventually. But I went and did that story, and that was really my first sort of dive into lacrosse. And as crazy as that story was, and there were lots of details, and I was fortunate to be paired with Pharrell Evans, a superb reporter for Sports Illustrated, and we went down there and did a story together on the Duke lacrosse situation. And so there were a lot of legal details and cultural details and the press and everything else. But the thing that sort of stuck with me beyond the obvious, it was a sensational nationwide story for months. Years, a year and a half, actually. But what sort of stuck with me was, even though Duke, there's this cliche of lacrosse as being this, upper class prep school, white sport, rich, entitled, a lot of drinking, and I sort of had that in my mind. But then when I got there, I'm talking to the lone black lacrosse player, the goalie, Devin Sherwood, and he's saying, that's not my experience here, even though the press was sort of harping on the racist sort of issues involved, and the implications of it and the going on in that case. And his father, Chuck, had been the first black lacrosse player at Duke back in the 70s. Same thing. And then there were, then I was talking to sons of firemen and Casey Carroll and the Loftus brothers, and they were the first kids in their family to go to college. Again, I'm not saying that the other part of the sport is not true. The cliche is very true. There's certainly a lot of prep school, upper class, white kids playing lacrosse, but it was the exceptions that it sort of stuck with me that made me think, that's not quite the cliche. This is this sport too, believe it or not, is being used as a ladder for a family to sort of climb up from blue collar for the next generation getting a white collar job. And that was the other thing that I learned, which was, and you and I've spoke about this, I've covered a ton of pro sports, Sacramento Kings, San Francisco Giants, Niners, and then in Miami, all those pro sports, Super Bowls, World Series, et cetera. And sort of grew up with that as sort of, well, that's the next step. But in lacrosse, there were pro leagues. There have been pro leagues. There's still pro leagues. But they sort of come and go. And you're not making more than, certainly in the outdoor league at the time, 25, 30,000, maybe. And maybe a little bit more for the NLL, the National Lacrosse League, which is an indoor league, box league. And but no one's going into lacrosse to become a millionaire. And so what I found was all these guys are saying, and especially the kids, the sons of firemen, were saying, well, how when they recruited us, they told us, we're going to set you up. You come here to Duke and you'll get a job on Wall Street. You'll get internships. You'll be you can work as a trader. You can work in finance. And what I found was, and what I was told was like, yeah, in all these schools, the top ones all have sort of pipelines into Wall Street because former lacrosse players now are there and established, and they hire lacrosse players. So making it big in lacrosse, making money in lacrosse, you sort of topped out as a lacrosse player, and then the most prestige then and now was the NCAA tournament, but the payoff was a job on Wall Street, a job in finance in Baltimore and New York, and jiggling your leg behind a terminal for 12 hours a day, and they worked. It's not like it was an easy job, but that was the payoff. So those are two elements where I'm thinking, well, this sport's a little bit different than what I expected, and it kind of stuck with me. And then 4 years later, I went and did a story on the Iroquois Nationals, and the Iroquois Nationals are the only Indigenous team recognized by an international organization as a nation. And what I mean by that is they are the Iroquois upstate New York, and also over the border, over the St. Lawrence River into Canada, around Ontario. And they are the inventors of the game, the creators of the game. They consider it a religion, a religious practice in many ways, a way of healing for their community and for people. And they hold medicine games multiple times a year for healing and community cohesion, and to please the creator and to entertain the creator. That's why they play lacrosse. And they also happen to play an incredible fast break, wonderful behind the head, behind the back style that is breathtaking, that is incredible to see. And they're the third best team in the world behind the US and Canada in field lacrosse. And in box lacrosse, until recently, they were the number 2 team, meaning the indoor game. So again, this is completely contrary to the cliche of an upper class prep school sport. Native Americans are some of the poorest people on this continent, and this game was not an expression of entitlement for them at all. It's an expression of joy, of spirituality, and of national pride, because the Iroquois Nationals also travel on their own passports. They have a treaty that is signed by George Washington from 1794, the Treaty of Canandaigua, that is still honored by the United States every year with $4,500 worth of muslin shipped to the Iroquois. And, some years back, a couple decades ago, the U.S. is like, can we stop with these payments? And the Iroquois, who actually prefer to be called the Haudenosaune, which is their true names.
Just trying to figure out how to pronounce that. So thank you for yes.
Haudenosaune, yeah. And they officially changed their name from the Iroquois Nationals to the Haudenosaune Nationals in 2021. But the Haudenosaune said, you're going to honor this treaty. We are not going to take a payoff, because treaties are between two nations. This is not some sort of gift you give us through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This is not some sort of federal grant. The most conservative elements of the Six Nations of the Haudenosaune, the Onondaga, do not pay taxes, don't take part in the census, refuse all federal funding. They consider themselves a nation, and they have that imprimatur from the Federation of International Lacrosse, the hub of entitlement, so to speak. But yet, lacrosse, of all things, in 1987, recognized the Iroquois as a nation and welcomed in it. And now there have been tensions, there have been problems, but the Iroquois travel on their own passports. And before 9/11, they were handwritten passports. Now they've had to upgrade, but it's been a problem. They've missed world championships in 2010 and 2015. I was with them in Israel when they almost didn't make it again. That sort of runs contrary to how you want to run a competitive championship. But regardless, this lacrosse is not just this sport of white entitlement. It's a sport that encompasses 1,000 years of the continent's history in a way no other sport does. Jacques Barzone, the famous, not famous, but sorry, his quote is famous. He's an essayist and a professor at Columbia University. In the 50s, wrote an essay, and it's used every time anybody wants to talk about the romance of baseball. says, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball, the rules and reality of the game. And, anytime anybody wants to back up the idea that it's the national pastime, they quote Jacques Barzone. Well, I would argue that in many ways, baseball doesn't encompass the history of Native America and the fact that the game was, it's sort of appropriation by whites in America, kind of tracked with the appropriation of lands and territory for the Native Americans. It doesn't take into account Wall Street or the fact that the game is the growth, which has been incredible over the last 20 years or so. Some people say it's the fastest growing sport in America. Percentage wise, it was up until 2018 or so. But it also, that growth was powered by women and Title IX and the boom of women's sports and women's lacrosse in particular was a huge beneficiary of Title IX. And again, Tim, you would know that because Northwestern, out of nowhere, because of a blue collar, not upper class white person named Kelly Amonte Hiller. She grew up with no money in the Northeast, and an incredible player, and built Northwestern lacrosse out of nothing and into a national power and expanded the game that way. So all those elements, the long and the short of it, and I apologize, it's a 500-page book. So
no, this is great.
Yeah.
I mean, look, but there's so much to unpack there. But like for example,
but let me just finish. So all those elements, though, just to wind it up, all those elements, I thought this game is not what I expected. There's parts of the cliche that absolutely I wanted to interrogate, and some of it is very much true. There's a reason a cliche is a cliche, but there's a lot of elements of this game that I found mesmerizing, and I'm not a lacrosse person. And in fact, the game would not leave me alone. Like, it constantly was nibbling at me. And I had to get it out because I thought there was something important to say about the country. And I think it, in many ways, even though football, of course, is the absolute King Kong of sports in America, and you can certainly make the case of baseball as a national pastime, I really think that no sport in many ways reflects many of the cultural preoccupations of this country more than lacrosse does.
All right, what's this? Yinzelvania? My goodness. Pittsburgh, hello. One of the great joys of doing this show is discovering all the great companies that are out there that are devoted to the memories of and their affiliations with that of the past that we love to obsess about here on this show, especially in the realm of retro sports. And Yinzelvania is perhaps one of the greatest examples of that. If you grew up or know friends from the Western Pennsylvania area of this beautiful country of ours, you will enjoy browsing and purchasing from our friends at Yinzelvania.com. I'll spell it for you, just relax. But it's a completely family-owned and operated apparel retail that specializes in the designs that celebrate the unique people of places and traditions of Pittsburgh and its surrounding areas. If you have a deep love, like they do, of Western Pennsylvania sports history, cultural remembrances, all kinds of stuff from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and more, you will enjoy and return often to Yinzelvania.com. If you remember teams and leagues of the past, if you're into roller rinks or stores, remember a radio or a TV station of the past, all kinds of those things, food and drink. Maybe there's just a quote from Myron Cope, the great Pittsburgh Steelers broadcaster that you remember, in t-shirt form, and all kinds of other stuff too. There's just an amazing array of stuff from all kinds of sports, some seasonal stuff there, retro minor league baseball memories, as well as all kinds of adjacencies to being a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and Steeler Nation. All that and more at Yinzelvania.com. I'll spell it for you. It's Yinzylvania, Yinzelvania.com. Use a promo code, of course. We want to save you some bucks while you go there. And that promo code is Good Seats Still Available. That's all one word. Good Seats Still Available. That's the promo code. And our friends at Yinzelvania.com. Check them out. You'll be glad you did. And go Pittsburgh Steelers and Steeler Nation. And now back to our conversation. The irony, that's the word that strikes me, right? The irony of this originally Native American endeavor, activity, call it a sport, and the pre-colony world juxtaposed now with what you hinted at before, which is this, for all intents and purposes, all boys network, if you will. I mean, I'm sure women benefit from it too, to the Wall Street thing and that sort of dynamic, right? Which is the ultimate sort of hint of white privilege, so to speak, right? So right there, that irony alone is a narrative that is just worth delving into and just marveling at.
Absolutely. I mean, and it is to lacrosse's credit, because on paper you would think, well, this is a sport that's not gonna, accept Native Americans as equals. But this is a sport that probably skews a bit conservative, in terms of its politics. That too, I found, is less, there are exceptions to that rule. But the fact is that Native Americans, and they look over and over, not just the Haudenosaune, not the Iroquois, but all Native Americans, there is a mantra that they say over and over to, especially to white media when we come calling, which is, we are still here. You don't forget, we are still here. People think we're gone. People think we're on reservations. No, we're still here and we matter. And I would argue that there are very few places in our culture, American culture, where the Native American element, influence, and current excellence is dealt with on a daily and prominent basis as it is in lacrosse, international lacrosse, because they're great. They're thrilling. They're like Brazil. The Haudenosaune are everybody's second favorite team when you go to a world championship. And frankly, a lot of people's favorite team, because they're so dynamic and fun to watch. And there's an element of, even though America is the superpower, Americans supposedly love an underdog. And it's very hard to not find yourself amazed, enthralled, and at times pulling for the Haudenosaune to pull the great upset. And they haven't done it yet, not in field lacrosse. They've done it in box. But the point is that you're exactly right. It's ironic because it's completely contrary. This is not the platform where you thought Native Americans would have a place at the table on equal footing and performing at a level of high excellence and challenging, essentially the colonizers of their continent. And
I'm going to ask you to do the impossible, and that is, can you explain in somewhat short order, because the book goes into more detail, how does that jump, if you will, or that transformation go from that, the 6 or 5 nations dynamic of these tribes and stuff into the, let's call it the white New England elite, so to speak?
Well, it happened via Canada, really. What happened was that in the late 1800s, a future dentist named, and he was a teenager, named George Beers, basically became enthralled with the Native American game, and very quickly insisted that it become the Canadian game. Lacrosse is, he insisted, he was sort of a propaganda guy, because he basically told everyone that it was the national game of Canada and had been declared so. And really, he sort of made that up. It was found out later that it really wasn't officially the national game of Canada until the congressional Canadian legislature, I think later in the 60s or 70s, I can't remember exactly when, declared it the summer sport of Canada. But what he did in the late 1800s, George Beers, was he basically appropriated the sport. He made up rules and the Canadian Amateur Canadian Lacrosse Association, which was the sort of governing body at the time. The Native Americans were so good, and the Canadians were still learning it, and they basically in 1880 declared that Native Americans couldn't play in the sport. And one of George Beers's earliest rules, even before that, was, no Native American will be able to play unless we say so. And so, in many ways, the Native American, the Mohawks and the Haudenosaune were kind of sidelined from the growth of the sport, and he tried to use it as a place for not just manliness and Canadian ruggedness, but also to infuse it as a sort of Victorian, Victorian principles of rules and regulations that he got from England. Eventually, Canadian, Irish, and Italians, but especially Irish immigrants, made it down to New York and the East Coast, and they brought the game with them back down. And then it was played before Queen Victoria, and on a tour with the Native Americans, went on tour as a team with Canadian players, went on a tour, and she was impressed. And then because of that, very soon after that, some East Coast clubs took up the sport, and it took off as an upper class game along the East Coast, Baltimore, New York, etc., and Boston as well. And so that's how it took root. And then at the same time, the Native American population, while this is happening, is being decimated, east, west, everywhere. So lacrosse is certainly less and less of a priority, competing with whites. They're not going to American colleges where lacrosse took root at Johns Hopkins and other places, and Ivy League schools. And for the longest time, there was the game was played certainly on reservations and on native territory by the Haudenosaune, and there were reservation rivalries, and medicine games were always played, but they sort of were cut out of the development of the field game as it grew up in the 20th century. And I'm just going to fast forward for a second to the point where in the 80s, when Roy Simmons Jr., his teammate Oren Lyons, who founded the Iroquois Nationals, played with Jim Brown, All-American goalie with Jim Brown at Syracuse in the 50s. He went to Oren Lyons, a faith keeper with the Onondaga, and said, "Hey, we should." Roy Simmons' Syracuse team had just won one of the great national championships, most dramatic national championships in 1983 in the history of the sport. And he said, Oren, let's get a field exhibition together. And Oren Lyons said, "We don't know how to play field. We don't have a field team," which to me remains one of the most heartbreaking American statements ever, that the Haudenosaune had sort of become so disengaged from the development of the sport that they didn't have a national team, didn't have a team like that. Now, there were Haudenosaune who consistently, one at a time, one or two, not even two, usually one at a time, would venture to Syracuse and play, and some were great. But overall, there wasn't this sort of national team. Where what happened was in the 1930s, the Canadians, the Montreal Canadiens, owners of the Canadiens and the Maple Leafs hockey teams were looking to fill up their buildings in the off season, their arenas, hockey arenas, and they started box lacrosse and box or indoor lacrosse, and it took off so much that it sort of destroyed field lacrosse in Canada as well. So Canada sort of got also disengaged from the game because the outdoor field game, and Native Americans were allowed to play and could make money. They didn't have to worry about being amateurs. They didn't have to worry about going to college. Where Native Americans have had a hard time with alienation and being away from their people for the longest time. So it's a tough transition often, and so they didn't have to deal with that. And box lacrosse, in many ways, sort of replaced field from 1930 to basically even to this day. In some ways, a lot of Native Americans will tell you they love box lacrosse far more than field, but for 50 years, box was the place. It was the place for really, if you wanted to see Native American lacrosse, indoor lacrosse leagues, and so there was this separation until Orin Lyons, along with Wes Patterson, a Tuscarora stick maker, they co-founded the Iroquois Nationals in 1983, and one of the people, again, they had white allies, Tom Hayes, Ron Balls of England, and Tom Hayes, former Rutgers coach, another blue collar guy out of Long Island. His dad was a tool and die man. He didn't come from money. And Tom Hayes was like, how can we possibly not have the creator of the sport in our game? And Tom Hayes became a great sort of champion of not only the Iroquois, but also just the internationalization of the game, and which leads us to a long process whereby lacrosse, for the first time in 80 years, is returning to the Olympics in 2028. And the question is whether or not the Iroquois, the Haudenosaune, will be allowed to play.
I want to get that. Well, it's gonna be my last question. So there you go. You skipped to the end there. Very, very adept of you. Let me ask you this though. So one of the questions I was going to ask, and you just kind of skirted into it a little bit, which is this, especially I guess on the box side of things, is this overlap between box lacrosse, indoor lacrosse, and hockey. And I think you got to some of it right with the arenas. And the owners of the arenas and stuff, but there's also a play kind of dynamic, a player dynamic that the skill set is, I want to say they're interchangeable, but
no. There's
been overlap, right?
No,
over
the
decades.
It's a lot of, I mean, hockey and lacrosse is, they say the fastest game on 2 feet, but I mean, essentially it's hockey on grass, and hockey is lacrosse on ice. I mean, essentially the skill set is incredibly similar. Obviously the speed of hockey is far more intense and fast. But, one of the amazing things about lacrosse, it is an incredibly democratic game, in the sense that I've never seen a sport where the first black player for Johns Hopkins, Joe Carlton, was recruited as a basketball player and had never played lacrosse. And he was suddenly playing, they recruited to play, not recruited, like just sort of, he was already at Hopkins. They're like invited to like come play lacrosse on a national championship team. I don't know any other sport that, Alabama football is not saying, you know what, you're a good lacrosse player. Why don't you, come and play defensive back for us? But the fact is that lacrosse rewards, you don't have to be 6'8", you don't have to have 4.4 speed. If you know how to rotate on defense and move your feet, you can at least get in front of somebody with a stick and play enough passable defense so you could play. It doesn't happen as much now, but you could play on a championship Hopkins team. That kind of conversion from football players, basketball players to lacrosse players happened all the time. And a lot of lacrosse players played hockey, and there's absolute crossover between that, but also, basketball, same thing. It's all kind of, centering and firing at the same sort of target. And the movements and the give and goes and everything else are very similar.
I'm fascinated by all this because, in essence, you're talking about a sport that evolved, even a century and a half, even maybe if not even earlier than that, or earlier than the quote unquote national pastime of baseball, right? So everybody sort of fawns over the history of baseball, and rightly so, right? It's probably the most overwritten about sport, and arguably in lieu of the fact that it's professionally got started in the 1860s and all that kind of stuff. But
right, but remember, its precursor is rounder. Like it's an import from England.
Exactly right.
Football,
but this even supersedes that in terms of depth,
lacrosse goes back to 1100 approximately, and it comes literally out of the North American continent. The sticks are made of hickory. The ball was made of deerskin and stuffed with feathers. I mean, it literally grew out of the ground in a way no other sport did. I mean, even basketball comes from a Canadian, so I mean, obviously he's from the continent, but I'm just saying this sport has been part of the North American experience for a millennium, and no other sport can say that. And again, no other sport encompasses the Native American experience, not just in the past, but in a place where they're performing at a high level today.
Yeah, it's an incredible. And I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of sports fans in this country, or frankly, just American history buffs who kind of think they've got the sports and culture and thing kind of figured out. Because I think this book really, and I said it earlier, I mean, I think this is going to be a go-to, I'm gonna call it reference book, because it's much more engaging than just being a reference book. But this is probably the best encapsulation of all of that. I think it's going to open up a lot of people's eyes. Let me ask you this.
And let me just say this one thing, Tim.
Yeah, sure.
If it had only been an upper class, prep school sport, I wouldn't have written the book. It's the elements that were the exceptions to that cliche that made the sport compelling, and I think that makes the sport important.
Well, so that leads me nicely then into what my next question was. Tell me then about the college growth of the game in college, right? Because obviously the college game is arguably where the greatest talent lies. Is probably the highest level of play, at least in the United States,
and the biggest crowds by far.
Crowds. But we'll get to the on again, off again flirtations with the pro thing in a minute. But tell me about how rich this college game is, and it's still fairly regional, although it's gotten some shoots elsewhere, as you mentioned with Northwestern and the women's game. Tell me about that development, because it seems stronger than ever. Yet it also feels like it still hasn't gotten wider.
It's a slow grow, as they say, but it's happening. And what I mean by that is, look, Hopkins hasn't won a championship in almost more than 20 years. Like it used to be Hopkins, Maryland, Navy, Cornell, Yale,
occasionally Syracuse.
Recently, Syracuse, of course, but it was definitely a Northeast sport. Then Willie Scroggs gets a beachhead down in North Carolina. Kelly Amonte Hiller in Northwestern creates a dynasty there. There's Bill Tierney, who arguably is the greatest American coach, won 6 championships at Princeton, goes out to Denver and wins a national championship there, which is still a national power. Florida has become one of the top teams in the women's game. Texas has become a hotbed. California has become a hotbed. They still desperately need, Stanford, Cal, UCLA, and USC to get beyond the club level on the men's game. The women's game is at USC. The women's game is, D1 and doing well. So the fact is that it has spread nationwide. I mean, Notre Dame is the most recent, breakthrough. I mean, it's been a power for a while, but did not break through until recently with national championships. So now you have, and Michigan has now got an excellent program. You have beachheads all over where the game is spreading, and the women's game is doing it even more because of Title IX. It balances out football's numbers. You have rosters of 30 women, 30 players, and athletic directors love it. And so it's moving, and college is still the engine of its growth. You're not going to get probably a full scholarship. I mean, one great player will get a full scholarship, but I think it's 12.6 scholarships per school, if the numbers haven't changed. The scholarships are split up, and so you'll get some money, but it's a great sweetener for your resume if you're applying for colleges and they're looking for players. And so it's that's where you're seeing its growth, and it definitely has nationally. It's seeping. And but to your point, look, the best iteration, I would argue, of the outdoor pro game, and probably the indoor pro game with the National Lacrosse League, but the outdoor pro game is Paul Rabel's current Premier Lacrosse League. I mean, it's smart. They're savvy. They're internet savvy. They're technically interesting. They make a point of having all these incredible camera angles and interviews and also during the pandemic, lacrosse was the first sport to actually do a bubble tournament before anybody else, and that was the PLL trying to get a foothold and fill some programming for NBC when the Olympics were postponed. So it's gotten national contracts that they never had with ESPN, and it got an incredible amount of funding. However, you still look in the stands and they're not exactly packing them in. I mean, it's great TV fodder. You'll see it on the weekends, but the thing that lacrosse needs to do, and I'm not sure it will be able to do, is get beyond what they like to call the endemic fan. They need the non-endemic, non-lacrosse family fan to tune in and care about it in a way that hockey has. And I would say that I talked. Joe Tsai is the great investor, Alibaba businessman, former Yale lacrosse player, Brooklyn Nets owner, is a big booster of lacrosse, big financial booster, and really one of the big main engines behind their Olympic push. And Joe Tsai said to me, "Yeah, it'll probably always be a niche sport, but I don't understand why it can't be as big as hockey. Like if hockey can be in Phoenix, or wherever in Sunbelt in Miami, then why can't lacrosse take off?" And it's a good question. I'm not sure there's a good answer yet, but certainly you're going to have it's going to be a participation based thing. I think it's going to be like soccer. You're going to have a lot of kids playing it, and eventually everyone thought that soccer would, because these kids would grow up to be fans, soccer would boom in America. Didn't quite happen that way. Like the biggest reason it happened, I think, is because Premier League soccer and HD TV made the game look really, really fun and became sort of a Gen Z phenomenon. So it's going to be interesting to see if the pro iteration can ever really take off. But they're giving it their best effort right now.
No, it's true, and I think the touring model, which literally just transformed for this coming season to, ironically, what Major League Lacrosse, the then competing outdoor league, was doing, right, to now be at least I want to say in theory, but in reality, in actual teams in actual locations.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's exact, and that's no one wants to admit, but that's a failure. I mean, they had a touring model and they felt really good about it. Clearly, they've switched. I mean, and that touring model, in whatever way, I mean, no one knows what the finances are exactly, but in some way didn't pay off, and they've now switched to the city model. And I don't. Maybe it's just a smart pivot. Maybe it's a sign of weakness. I can't really tell. But the fact is that that's where they're at, and they're giving it a shot. I mean,
and the touring model,
and the most important thing for the players is health insurance. Like they for the first time, it's a real true pro league that is taking care of its players. The players have equity in it, so they're willing to invest their time in it in a way that maybe the ML and for the first time you are having lacrosse players. They have to hustle because they're going to do this. The pro leagues, they'll do camps, they'll do video sort of coaching, and equipment sponsorships, and so they're still cobbling together. But you can make a living now, a good living, if you're hustling, by being a lacrosse player who's willing to hustle even when you're not playing. But you can be a lacrosse player as opposed to a guy who is working as a trader on Wall Street, and then on the weekends packs his bag and goes and plays a game or two for the weekend, and then comes back home.
Right, which I think was the original Major League Lacrosse outdoor model, and arguably has sustained, and I think a lot of people get surprised at this, has sustained the National Lacrosse League, which, if you incorporate all its previous incarnations, it's a straight line. It's 39 years old, this National Lacrosse League on the indoor front.
Yeah, so, and you're also and also their salaries are a little higher than the outdoor league. So they've now again, at last I looked, the salaries were like, the average salary is like $35,000-$40,000 a year. Like, we're not talking about you're going to make a ton of money. And
That's
so,
actually not bad when you think about it, because it used to be much less and more
no question,
per
no
diem, if you
question.
will,
Right. And
10 years ago.
if you add in the 30 or so thousand that you get from the PLL, and then you add in, again, camps and coaching, you can make a good living. But again, it's a hustle. It's a hustle.
But I guess we could sort of wrap the piece on the pro thing up, is that it certainly always feels like it's on the precipice, right? There's something, and to your point, right? I mean, we see this like with the WNBA, which you think would be further along. It's sort of getting there, but I mean, the average salary, I think, even for some of the star players, is like $75,000-$80,000, right? Which is, you can hustle, you can play abroad, you can play with Unrivaled now. I mean, more opportunities coming. It feels to me like there are yet still more opportunities to come for this sport. And including breaking out from its sort of regional, origin kind of story. And I think too, I mean, just the fact that you can even attempt a full-time living at a hustle doing this, right, is even progress than from, say, 10 years ago, when it was work to live, meaning I got to work my regular day job, which, as we said earlier offline, was, as we talked to, for example, I don't know, soccer players in the old North American Soccer League in the 70s and 80s, right? Mostly in the 70s, these players, especially the American ones, are the ones that came over and stayed from abroad. They were telling amazing stories, crazy stories about like the 3 or 4 other jobs that they were doing during the off season, and as well as maybe one during the season, just to keep their keep their families afloat. So,
and I will tell you that lacrosse players overall would say to me, you can't believe like how envious I am when I see like, these guys who just get to train, and live and play their game. And we're talking about great lacrosse players who are like, I wonder how great I could actually be if I were able to do this full time. Like, and there's sort of a wistfulness about it, because at least until now, and even so now, you're hustling. The ability to like be an athlete full time, train, eat well, get your rest, and be an athlete full time, and train in the off season for that alone, is not available to most lacrosse players. And there is a feeling of, I could be so much better if I could have the life of an NBA player or an NFL player. They look wistfully at all those athletes and kind of go, yeah, I can see it.
I think pro volleyball, I think women's soccer, I think there are a lot of sports or tangents of that are all at that. And look, it may be aided and abetted by the new asset class that private equity now sees in sports, which frankly is not going to end well at the end of the day. But 4 pickleball leagues and 4 major, volleyball leagues. I mean, it's the best of times, but ultimately it'll be the worst of times when some of these can't sort of survive without either, homogenizing themselves or emerging, or I don't know. Will there be a sustainable? I mean, lacrosse has certainly had its share of, ups and downs, right? Well, why not these other sports too?
Well, let me just betray my prejudice here. I certainly kind of get pickleball as a participatory sport, but as a spectator sport, it's completely lost on me.
Totally agree.
Lacrosse can be an incredibly dynamic, beautiful game, as can hockey, especially in person. And I think there's no greater difference between the televised and live version of sports than in ice hockey. I mean, you see it on TV and you really have no sense of the speed and the violence and just the skill level as you do in person. And really the feeling of the crowd is completely different than almost any other sport, the devotion, the intensity. And I would argue that it's the same with lacrosse. It's an incredible game. The skill level is astonishing, and its place in the culture is unparalleled. I think people need to check it out.
All right, last question then, and we hinted at it earlier, but I think it's timely, right? Is the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Now, lacrosse has been field lacrosse has been brought back into the mix. It's been a while.
Right, 1948, and they created a new version of the game, sixes, kind of like rugby sixes or whatever.
Rugby sevens, right? Yeah.
Right, that's rugby seven. Sorry, but it's basically sixes, which is a sped up, um, Olympic friendly, very small. Like, you can have 50 guys on a college lacrosse team. The number for sixes right now, I think, is 12. And so, to sort of get in line with the Olympics sort of goal of reducing bloat and keeping the levels low, there's going to be the sixes, which is a faster, almost, it's almost like basketball. It's completely different, a completely sped up version, a hyper version of field lacrosse. But it's yeah, and they're going to have that at the Olympics, and they certainly, people in lacrosse believe this is just another sign of the game's growth and its appeal. They were very smart. Again, the sport's been led by some smart people who figured out, we've got to change, we've got to adjust, we've got to get more modern and younger looking. But there's a real question. The Haudenosaune are the third best team in the world in field, fifth best in sixes right now. But haven't been, frankly, many sixes competitions. So right now the IOC doesn't recognize the Haudenosaune as a nation, and are saying, well, you're not going to be able to play here, and that's going to create a problem because not only does the Haudenosaune have great sympathy from not just its own people, but many star players, white players in the game from Canada and the U.S. They are friends and support the Haudenosaune cause. But it's going to be a real question about whether they're allowed to play, and a real question of, well, you're going to have an Olympics on American soil, and you're going to bring back this ancient Native American game, and you're going to have the top six teams in men's and women's, and you're not going to have the Haudenosaune. How do you justify that? And that's going to be a question asked over and over again. If the IOC sticks to its guns and says, that's it, you can't come in, or they may come together and figure out a creative way to have them involved. We'll see. There are exceptions, like the refugee Olympic team that has been in the Olympics. So the IOC is known to bend, and it's known to be creative when it wants to be. But they're very frightened of opening quote unquote a Pandora's box of other indigenous nations putting up their hand and saying, well, if they're allowed, we should be allowed.
Yeah, I can see the Basque region in Spain, right, wanting to do the same, say, for soccer or some other things, or yeah.
Yeah, but lacrosse's argument is this is a completely one-off situation. They invented the game. They're one of the top teams in the world, and they've always had a message of peace. We can't ignore, on American soil of all things, the Native American influence in this game, and so it's going to be a sticky issue. Unless the IOC somehow finds a way to allow it, we'll see what happens.
All right. Last question related, though, to that is the growth that's occurred with the World Lacrosse Championships, especially on the men's side. It almost feels to me like they're trying to, and I saw the tournament on television, on the San Diego one in 2023. And there were 30 teams in that, right? So it's not like this is not a small group of countries that play the game at a high level.
And in Israel was 48. So,
Israel was the one before that, exactly right.
But there were 48 teams.
Oh, there are 48 teams. Sorry, I didn't even know that.
No. You were right.
Israel was actually hosting
30 in San Diego. Yeah, there were 30
in
San Diego. Yeah.
But so it feels to me like they're trying to kind of get it to a place where hopefully it sticks in the Olympics, as well as a heightened lacrosse world championship, where you sort of have like a, if you will, a World Cup-esque soccer-like thing, where both of those are the sort of international bright light tournaments that people should be shooting for on a regular pace, every couple of years basis.
Well, it's grown. There are now 93, I think, lacrosse nations in World Lacrosse in the federation. And in the last, this has been a growth that has been fueled by, easy passport type of, you had American, Irish born kids, or, with grandparents and the passports, they were allowed to play for Ireland. So there's a lot of American and Canadian influence on these other teams, a lot of them, but Israel very quickly was able to build in 8 years themselves into a top 8 power in the sport, men and women. Japan has become lack of a better word, the rising power in Japan as well. I mean, in lacrosse as well. So, America and the U.S. and Canada remain the dominant powers. Probably the best thing that could happen internationally is if another team wins it. But since 1967, there was only 2 teams that have won it, the U.S. and Canada, and the U.S. has won most of them. I think Canada's won 3, I believe. So, it's got to grow. They're pushing to grow it. This is Tom Hayes' vision. It's become an international sport, and they would love for it to be in the next games in Australia in 2032. For the moment, in LA, it's a one-off, but we'll see how it goes there, and if they can possibly stick in it again. And if Australia offers it up for 2032, they could get on a roll.
All right, our thanks to Scott. That's SL to you. The book is close to a masterpiece, and I don't say that very often. It is an amazing work. It is well researched. You can tell many years were put into its creation, and even if you're just mildly interested or just have heard of this sport of lacrosse, you will find it engrossing. And if you are a player or an aficionado of the sport, you will eat this up and then some, and keep it proudly on your shelf, because it will be a well referenced and referred to resource in the years to come. It is called The American Game: History and Hope in the Country of Lacrosse. Again, by S.L. Price, our guest this week. It is available wherever good books are found as of tomorrow, as we drop this, the 20th of May. If this is the 19th of May when we drop the episode, well, you can pre-order it just about anywhere good books are found. Of course, you can go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, search up this episode 395, and place your order through our links there on Amazon, and you'll get it as quickly as humanly possible as soon as it's published. And that could be either the hardcover or the Kindle or even the audiobook form of such, and we'll get a couple of referral shekels of love, and we appreciate that if you did it that way. If you'd like to follow Scott's work online and in the socials, you can do so as follows. On the web, you can find him at byslprice.com, byslprice.com. On Blue Sky, you'll find him at byslp.bsky.bsky.social. That's byslp.bsky.social. And on the X thing, you'll find him at byslprice, by SL Price. See how that works? Okay, there you go. You can also meet and greet Scott at a number of different appearances coming up. Tomorrow, the 20th, if you're in Washington, D.C., you can meet him for a little event there in concert with the Publication Day, the launch there, a little celebration there at Politics and Prose, very famous bookstore there at 5015 Connecticut Avenue Northwest in D.C. On the 22nd of May, Scott will be at the Enoch Pratt Free Library Central Branch in the Wheeler Auditorium there in Baltimore. Another conversation there, I think, with the former U.S. Lacrosse CEO. What's his name? Steve Stenerson. Yes. Also, June 6th in Baltimore at the Ivy Bookshop, and July 7th at Wonderland Books in Bethesda, Maryland, and I think even in August 13th, out there in Sonoma, California. And if you want to find out upcoming appearances by Scott beyond those, you can, again, find them on the website there at byslprice.com. While you're online, make sure you bookmark our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Lots of fun stuff there. We post all of our episodes there. Lots of great merch there in our merch section. Check that out. Our socials, let's see, largely we're most active at on the X thing at Good Seats Still, as well as on Blue Sky at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Other places you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available, including YouTube, where we also publish this show. Of course, the best way to get this show is to make sure that you're subscribed or following us on your favorite podcast feed/player, whatever, because that's the quickest way, and you'll know the second we send them out, you'll have them and get them into your earbuds. Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Our thanks to Jerry Payne for his audio excellence this week. As always, thank you. And thank you, he says, for listening. And we'll see you next week. Stay sane and safe, and enjoy the summer. I think it's almost here.